like I got hit in the head with a comically large object.
I'm gonna be real with you. I have no idea what you're talking about, okay? None.
Right. So, who are you? And where am I? Did I fall into another portal again?
Right. Welcome to the inside of your mind. I'm your darker half. My name is Aster. And to make matters worse, there's only one way you're getting out of here.
By talking about a DLC for a game you've never even mentioned. Wait a minute, that seems like a really contrived way to justify spending like $30 on a DLC.
That is exactly what we're doing here.
Alright, I guess that could be a fun way to make an intro to a video. Right, so, what game are we doing?
Simple.
Far Cry 6. Oh, biscuits. Alright, so I got a slight confession to make real quick. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
Confess, my child. What is your sin?
I like Ubisoft games.
Oh, my word, child. Why?
I don't know. They just scratch a really particular itch that nothing else quite does. They shouldn't, but I can't help myself. It's like video game junk food.
I see. Your penance is 4 Bloody Marys and 6 hours of lo-fi hip-hop.
Right, so as you can probably imagine, I recently got on a really big Far Cry hyperfixation. And after I finished Far Cry 4, I wanted more Far Cry. And I didn't want to replay 3 again for the millionth time. So I saw that number 6 was on sale, and I bought it with the season pass.
I'm sorry. You did what?
I, bought it with the season pass?
It's worse than I thought. I think there's only one way I can cure you now.
Oh god. What is it?
That depends. What are your thoughts on Watch_Dogs?
Ooh, yes, I love those games!
Yep. The only cure is death.
Okay, so before we get started, I would like to note that my only experience with Far Cry 6 up to this point has been the opening level and these villain DLCs specifically, as that is the reason I bought the game. So I just wanted to get that out the way so you know where I'm coming from. Right, so before I can really talk about these DLCs individually, I first gotta talk about the framework they all share. So to start that off, I'm going to be talking about the levels that you are dropped in. Alright, so I know I said they're levels, but they're more like small open worlds, if you will. And thanks to that, they don't quite feel like DLC, they feel more like an expansion pack, if that sort of gets across what I'm trying to say. Right, so just using that as a starting point, these already feel like some of the best DLCs that money can buy. At least in my opinion, because the best DLC, to me, always feels like it builds off of what the game already had, whether that be in difficulty or just in game mechanics. And essentially what you can do in these open worlds is you can take on side quests as well as main objectives. What most of your side quests are gonna look like is you have to earn safe houses by doing a combat trial. And then there are actual combat arenas that are framed in the story, yes, but these combat arenas are just that, squares for combat, pretty much. Now, this is in no way a bad thing, as one of the best parts of Far Cry is its combat system. Shooting in Far Cry is fun. Now, the safe houses in particular, essentially all you really have there is maybe one wave of enemies and a very very bad mini-boss. Typically, this will be the kind of mini-boss you will see on the higher mind levels that will be roaming around the open world. Now, how these safe houses primarily function is, if you need to take a break from combat and sort of upgrade yourself a little bit, you can at these safe houses, and that's essentially all they're there for. They are pretty good for the early game, but I find like the longer you go on and the better your character gets, the more useless and tedious these things kind of become. Now, one other thing the DLCs have is they have a gun course. These are essentially just areas purely for combat, where you fight a few waves of enemies, and once you get a certain like kill count, without dying, you can then claim a gun. Unfortunately, these guns tend to get like really repetitive. Like, don't get me wrong, as you continue, yes, the aesthetics do change. However, they're all essentially gonna do the exact same thing as in the other DLCs. You're always gonna have a grenade launcher, a sniper rifle, a pistol, a machine pistol, things of that nature. You're always gonna have something for those categories, only one gun for each category. Now, one thing these do accomplish is you only have to do them once, and then you unlock the ability to purchase the weapons at any point from your safe house. However, if you're playing these DLCs back to back to back, one thing I will say is this gets annoyingly repetitive, and is actually one of the worst parts of the DLC, is having to go back through and earn these guns, because the challenges don't change, just they change skin at best. Like, even the arenas don't feel like they change that much. One thing you will also find throughout the entirety of the DLCs is that you find the standard Ubisoft affair, that being notes just seemingly scattered at random. You don't have to pick them up, however, they do add to the backstory of each villain. The most unique collectible you're probably going to find here is the little bobbleheads, as well as the vision quests that you can partake in. I won't spoil those, as some of them are random, but most of them are scripted. However, I will talk about these little bobbleheads, as there are about 10 of them for each villain. And as you go on, they actually get incredibly hard to find, so I do recommend looking up a guide for that. At this point, you're probably wondering, okay, but what does these cosmetics get me? What does finding these bobbleheads do? Well, at the beginning of each DLC, you actually see a list of rewards that you can earn. Most of these are incredibly simple, however, they are all cosmetics for the base game. You cannot access them in the different DLCs. While doing the bobbleheads gets you a little charm for your gun that is very adorable, the best cosmetics you're really going to find is essentially just stuff that way you can cosplay the villain. In addition to all that, there's one more side objective that I do want to talk about, and that is you will have quests that pertain to the actual story. Now, most of these quests are not hard by any means whatsoever, but they are optional. So, in light of that, don't miss these quests. They are incredibly important and build on the characters. After you beat each DLC, you can actually go back through and do a deeper dive into the character's mind. This is essentially a New Game Plus version of the DLC. However, the primary catch for this is now you will have mini-bosses that actually populate the open world. I say mini-bosses, but they're not quite like the bosses in the base game that you fight. They're basically the ones that you have to take on to get your safe houses back. Now, while killing these buffed enemies and these mini-bosses will net you more points, oh yeah, and by the way, all of the enemies are also buffed in addition to that, just to make it a little bit harder. But after you kill these buffed enemies, you will get an extra amount of points, and this does make the DLC a lot easier because you also carry over your upgrades from the previous DLC. So say if you've maxed out a gun, you will have that maxed out gun when you go into mine level 2 and you won't have to upgrade it anymore. Now, all this said, it is still highly annoying the second time through because everything kind of becomes tedious and more of a chore to get through because you're no longer challenged. You're already as strong as you can be, and it's just doing it over again for the sake of doing it over again. The one thing you can probably get out of this is, I think the higher mind level you go to, the more likely you are to get the secret ending that each of these DLCs have. In my opinion, most of them are not worth it. However, the one for Voss is clearly the one that's been most worked on, and I would say the most worth it. However, just look these up on YouTube, you can find them, and you don't have to give yourself a headache and waste your time trying to get them. But I'm a filthy liar, I have lied to you, dear viewer, you see. For there is one more thing that I forgot to mention that takes these silly little DLCs from maybe a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. It's the fact that these DLCs are roguelites. That's right, roguelites. Meaning, after you die, you lose everything. You lose most of your points, you lose your guns, the only thing you don't lose is your permanently upgraded abilities. Unfortunately, the landscape doesn't completely shift, which I'll get into the landscapes here in a second because I want to gush over them. However, when you die, you essentially lose everything and have to start from scratch again. Now, there are upgrades to make it to where you don't have to start completely from scratch. You will have, like, 6,000 points or so, but those cost a lot of money and a long time to get. And this works surprisingly well. Like, when I was first getting into the DLCs, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna get so annoying. But surprisingly, it actually makes the game better, because you're not running around as a god after like 5 minutes of gameplay because you unlocked a new gun. You're stuck with the pistol for a longer time because while you have the pistol, you will die quite a lot more. And another thing this does, it actually gives death meaning because you don't want to die. In most Far Cry games, when I'm assaulting somewhere, yes, occasionally do take time to like scout out the area, but most of the time, I'm going to charge in guns blazing, memorize the enemy layout, and then formulate a plan on, hey, what can I rely on being here once I round this corner, and do that. Here, it's a lot more, if you die, you are sent all the way back, and you have to spend 20, 30 extra minutes running back to wherever you were going, because there are not vehicles just lying around unless you get the upgrade for it. So yeah, that actually makes this a lot more entertaining than I thought it was originally going to be. And this works extremely well for Voss's DLC, as it adds a bit of ludonarrative synchronicity. I'm not going to explain what ludonarrative dissonance is, because I'm pretty sure that's a collective term that everyone has just heard to death by now. But the one we don't hear a lot about is the ludonarrative synchronicity. That being when story and gameplay work together in perfect tandem. Here, it doesn't work exactly the way one may think, because I doubt the villains are actually going in their mind fighting their demons that have disguised themselves as enemies from their past. Instead, you feel the struggle with them fighting their demons and constantly reliving their memories over and over and over again, because you as the player are having to relive these memories over and over and over again, seeing how things played out, how things could have done, and it really feels like, yes, these characters are being forced to address their trauma at the very least. So, I don't know, I just thought it was really cool and added a, whole new layer to these DLCs that just made it even better. And I actually felt for a lot of these characters when they had to confront their demons. And finally, the last thing I want to gush about before I get into, each of the individual story DLCs is I want to talk about these landscapes because, oh my god, these are the greatest first-person shooter levels I think I have ever played. Because most first-person shooter levels do not get anywhere near this creative. You get the landscape changing on a dime sometimes. They straight up redo the towers to where you're climbing an actual wall rather than just climbing the tower. And they have so much more liberties because they're inside the main character's psyche to actually play around with stuff that they couldn't before. Pagan's narcissism, while it was barely hinted at in Far Cry 4, here it is on full display. He's got gold statues everywhere, there's a giant pagan in the sky, for God's sakes. Or take Voss's DLC. The entire time, you're seeing, writing on walls, rocks, cages everywhere, neon just blaring. It is insane. And the entire thing feels so wonderful and fantastic, and like the creative team just really got to go ham and make whatever they wanted. Granted, I'm probably giving these a bit too much credit, but also most first-person shooters I see don't have levels anywhere near this creative. It is just so good. And probably my favorite part about these small maps is they will change biome on an absolute dime. Granted, the level transitions are not perfect because of how little space they have to work with in the map, but on Voss's Island, for instance, there is one part where I am at a bloody sea, the next moment I'm at a volcano, and then to top it all off, I'm fighting at a pirate camp suspended in the middle of the sky. I don't know, I just thought that was like super cool. Sorry, I had to gush over that because I didn't actually put it in the script, and just, oh my god, I can't believe I forgot to go on that tangent.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is?
You know, I think it's fair to say that Far Cry 3 started a trend in all of the Far Cry games where each game is progressively more defined by its poster boy villain. So, where better to start than the villain who set the bar?
Way up in the fucking sky!
This DLC, as you probably guessed, centers around Voss. However, it also kind of feels like he's having a bit of a, I don't know, I guess midlife crisis. Or, I guess it would be better to say an end-of-life crisis? After the start of the DLC, you are essentially just shit-talked by Jason and Citra the entire time. It is fantastic. And works surprisingly well. However, I have two complaints about the story even still. And the first one being the most, like, prevalent thing here, that we never hear from Hoyt, and I fully understand why. Most players didn't like Hoyt because they felt like that is where the story just got really, really boring. Despite the fact that that was literally the entire point. Alas, while we never see him in the DLC, which, okay, I can't let it go, just imagine. Okay, you get to see how Voss meets Hoyt. You know, Hoyt, the guy that makes Voss drop the psycho act and behave himself. Like, that would have been so cool to actually get to see. However, the most we really get is just a mention that, yeah, Hoyt's on the island. Voss doesn't like Hoyt. And that's as far as it goes. We never see how they started teaming up or anything like that, and it just feels like a missed opportunity. However, despite this, we actually still get a lot more Voss, which, I mean, come on. That's always a good thing, right?
What is it, Jason? Jason, what is it? Why aren't you laughing now like you did up there? What, is this not fun anymore? Have I failed to entertain you?
In this DLC, you're gonna kill Jason a lot. Like, every boss fight in this DLC is either Jason or Citra. And not to stay on this Hoyt thing, but I'm gonna be petty and stay on this Hoyt thing, you had a third boss sitting right there. You had Hoyt. Which, I mean, imagine just... Okay, I'm getting off topic, but basically my point is that it feels like if we had one more boss fight, it would have worked so much better than just killing Citra and Jason over and over and over again, because I began to get annoyed with fighting Jason, and admittedly, I do think that was part of the intent and the point, but it still feels odd that unlike the other DLCs, we don't have 3 or more bosses, we just have the same variations of Hoyt and Citra. However, there's one more negative thing that I must get out of the way because it weighs heavy on my heart every day and every single time that I think about it. Unfortunately, the Far Cry experience is now uncanon. Can we get a moment of silence for the Far Cry experience? And if you don't know what the Far Cry experience is, that's the weird video series where Voss just tortures a Hollywood actor. It's fantastic. It's on YouTube. It's 30 minutes. take some time out of your day and check that out. It is chef's kiss. So good.
Ah, yes. An unfortunate casualty. It will be missed.
The main purpose of this DLC is you're trying to reassemble the dagger from Far Cry 3. You know, the one that we worked, like, really hard to get? Well, this time it's separated into, like, 3 separate pieces. So that is the 3 missions that this DLC revolves around. I'm not gonna spoil them, however, each and every one of those missions is an absolute banger, and I love it. Oh yeah, and I wanted to make mention really quick of the fact that Voss has played so well in this DLC that quite a lot of the death lines you have, like when you are brought back to life, they feel improvised, and it's fantastic.
This fucking place again? How many fucking times am I gonna die? I'm like a cat or a big tiger.
Please, stay right here. Enjoy the crab rangoon. Don't move. I will be right back.
If Voss was the start of Far Cry being defined by its villains, I really think Pagan Min is where they perfected Far Cry being defined by these big, bad, intimidating main villains. Every time Pagan enters a scene for any reason, I am always standing at attention, captivated by everything he's doing, waiting to see what the next thing he's going to say or do is. And honestly, that holds true for the entirety of the video game in Far Cry 4. However, I do have a problem specifically with his introduction where it never felt right to me. Don't get me wrong. Pagan Min is absolutely the kind of person who would murder one of his henchmen in a manic rage because his henchman disobeyed orders. That is 100% Pagan. However, it is my personal belief that Pagan is more of a casually pull out gun, shoot henchman kind of person, not a John Wick someone to death with a pencil person.
I'm very particular with my words. Stop. Shoot. Stop. Shoot. Do those words sound the same?
But it got out of control.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
It got out of control.
Got out of control. I hate when things get out of control. Oh! One fucking job, but you couldn't fucking do that! And I got blood on my fucking shoes. At least there's a silver lining. We didn't completely fuck it up.
The other thing that I kind of take issue with in his introduction is the fact that he makes a comment about getting blood on his shoes. I figured the reason for this was going to be somewhere off in a log entry, but I was not going to search for those because the time spent reading his log entries was time that could be spent, you know, actually interacting with Pagan, playing the game that I'm here to play. So naturally, I never went out of my way to find this fabled log entry that would talk about why Pagan has such an obsession with his shoes and why the literal description of his shoes in the DLC says, "Don't get blood on these." I figured that was in a log entry, and I wasn't gonna search for it. But this DLC actually fixes that because it fully explains that. It builds off of Pagan Min's already established character in a way that actually somewhat feels believable. That said, I realize I'm getting off track, and I'm not exactly where I wanted to be at this moment, so, as you have probably guessed, I really like this Pagan Min DLC. And story-wise, this singular DLC blows Voss's story DLC out of the water in my opinion, simply because Pagan is far more interesting and captivating, to me at least, than Voss is. Probably my favorite part of this DLC is when Pagan rewrites the ending of Far Cry 4. It's fantastic, and I love the way his shadow reacts to it.
Devastated by the loss of his family, King Pagan threw himself into battle. No. Needs more pathos. king would never let that vile terrorist take another child from him. No! And so he laid down his life, not only to protect his adopted son, but to save all of Kirat.
No, don't leave me. Don't leave me.
Oh, love this country as I loved you, and as I love your mother.
Oh, so this is what we're telling people now, are we? What an utterly impressive crock of shit.
And another thing that I absolutely love about this DLC, what I would argue is the piece de resistance to all of this going on, is that this entire DLC is literally just framed as a Persona 4 dungeon. I realize that Black Suit Pagan over here is called Tyrant Pagan, however, it is Pagan's shadow and you cannot convince me otherwise. It literally even has the voice filter. It's fantastic! And to sort of double down on this Persona 4 comparison to Far Cry 6, I know it isn't fair, but hear me out here. You are literally building a mask to hide your faults. I repeat, building a mask to hide your faults is the literal objective of the DLC. I swear, this is a fantastic game and I love it. Also, as I mentioned before, this game actually builds off of Pagan's backstory that was alluded to in Far Cry 4, because I don't think it was ever mentioned directly that Pagan ran a triad before he ran Kirat. Unfortunately, as far as gameplay goes here, it in my opinion kind of falters a little, because where with Voss, the Deathloop thing felt like a natural progression for his character, because he had the speech about the definition for insanity. Here it just feels like, well, I mean, it was in the last game, so we kind of have to have it here. Luckily, this game does also succeed in aspects that I don't feel Voss's DLC did quite justice. Because in his DLC, the combat trials you had were framed as trials that Citra made Voss go through when he was training to be her warrior. Here, instead, you actually have something more unique to Pagan. What you're dealing with is Pagan has these golden statues that are scattered around his mind, and you're trying to restore them by essentially standing in one place and fighting off waves of bad guys, which is incredibly fun, and it works well with his character because Pagan has an overinflated ego of himself. Okay, so I want to run back over something I just said to sort of end this section off, and that is I said the Deathloop thing doesn't work as well here as it did with Voss. True, it doesn't work for me personally as well as it did with Voss, because of Voss's whole definition of insanity, but with Pagan, it does work because Pagan, I don't know, he strikes me in this DLC as the person who has had to watch all the events throughout his life play out, and is, now that everything is over, constantly reliving those memories, thinking, how could I have done it differently? How could I have had that perfect family that I wanted so much? And it's haunting, but it's also fantastic because that is who Pagan is. By the time Far Cry 4 rolls around, he literally looks at a dollar bill that has a picture of him on it, and he says, I don't even know if that's me anymore, because he doesn't feel like himself. He feels like a different person because of everything he's been through.
We knew this moment would come. We've prepared for it. Go. Go. God will not let them take me.
Okay, so this is going to be the part where I start to throw out a bit of a hot take, but I firmly think Far Cry 5 is an underappreciated masterpiece. To me, this game feels like one of those games you see at the start of a generation. You know, the one that tries to show off all the fancy new bells and whistles that this console can now pull off in this game series. Of course, the catch here being that I know pretty much all of you are yelling at me right now that this game came out in the middle of a console generation, and you're right, it did. But this game also felt like it was supposed to be the end of Far Cry, so they were trying to pull out as many bells and whistles as they possibly could. Which, I know this is off topic, but that's another thing I want to go and mention here. But apparently, not all of the Far Cry games take place in the same timeline, which is weird, because I always assumed they did, because Herc and Willis, you know, the best characters in the entire game! So yeah, as you're imagining, Far Cry 5 is one of those games that I have very strong opinions on. I do realize, of course, that probably wasn't the main focus of Far Cry 5, though that is what I personally ended up walking away with, I guess. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, because I am getting off topic here. Unfortunately, this was also the DLC that I was dreading to talk about the most. And it's not that I didn't like Joseph Seed and his family. It's precisely the opposite of I loved the way their stories wrapped up. I mean, just think about the canonical ending for Far Cry 5. Joseph's family is dead and gone. He is trapped inside of a bunker with the person who hates him more than anyone else, his flock stripped away from him, and the world is burning in Oppenheimer's worst nightmares above him, and he's just trapped in a bunker the rest of his days, only being able to talk to the one person who wants to kill him more than anyone else. I also want to touch on the fact that Joseph thinks he was right. He thinks he did a good thing. And then Far Cry New Dawn happens. Yeah, as you probably haven't guessed, I didn't play Far Cry New Dawn. I heard about it. It's one of those games that it does interest me, and I did want to play it at one point. But I don't want to play it anymore, because I'm just like, well, I got what I wanted from Far Cry 5. That feels like the perfect ending for these characters, to me, personally. However, this DLC continues Joseph's story, which I was like, well, I've played the other two, I have to play this one. And you know what, my child? I saw the light. The game fills in the blanks for who was, in my opinion, the most underbaked Far Cry villain of all time. A villain who had so much potential, but just almost none of it felt truly capitalized on. And you know what? I was right. I was right. The story continues Joseph Seed's story. Oh. Wow. Just wow. You really went there, didn't you? Look, as you can imagine, this is where the DLCs really started to get old and get on my nerves a bit, because where things that were once fun and novel had now quickly become tedious and aggravating. Honestly, the most fun parts of this DLC was getting to watch Joseph's takedowns, which were, you watch him break someone's neck using a Bible in his mouth, and you also see him gouge a person's eyeballs out with his thumbs. Which, I mean, granted, they are references to how he kills people in the last game, but it's like, that being the most interesting part of the DLCs, I don't know, it's not for me, really. However, I will say, another area this DLC actually somewhat had me captivated in is getting to watch Joseph question all of his actions to this point, feel genuine remorse for everything, because we do get him feeling remorse for the fact that his siblings and Faith die in Far Cry 5. However, here it's a whole different thing. You see Joseph mourning the fact that he has led his flock astray. One last thing I want to touch on before I end the Joseph Seed part of this video is you actually get to see what the events in the vault would have been if everything went exactly as Joseph had planned it and everyone managed to survive and go into the bunkers together. And it's fantastic because you watch as everything falls apart around them. And it's just like, yeah, it never could have worked. I don't know. It was just an interesting bit of story to me. It was a fun little side quest. Oh, well, right. I believe that's all of them. They're just 3 really fun and creative DLCs. However, in my opinion, they kind of dropped the ball on that last one.
Well, you did it. You justified spending $25 just to play 3 really fun and creative DLCs. So you're free to go, I guess.
Okay, hold up, wait a minute. This feels too easy. I can just walk away?
Well, yeah.
I can't keep you here. You're gonna wake up any second now, and then Jack's gonna interrogate you. Right. Well, in that case, it was great to meet you, I guess. Anyway, now how do I get out of here?
Hey, you're finally awake.
Ay, ow. What in the name of pasta happened?
What's the last thing you remember?
Well, I went downstairs and I wanted some coffee, saw you had some out on the counter, and, well, you know.
And you drank it, didn't you?
Yeah? And what's wrong with that?
That was my coffee. You really shouldn't drink my coffee.
Got it? Ow!
God, models are such low rates. Yeah. Yuck. Tastes like crap.